Well, it's time. It's Super Bowl week. We've been talking about it all season. Smirnoff, official vodka partner of the NFL and Super Bowl 59. You know I love the fact that it's affordable, right? You can get the world's number one vodka without breaking the bank, which is what the Smirnoff folks say is Smirnoff extraordinary. Like the fact that they have partnered with Complex, letting fans get their hands on some amazing hand-picked items for the price of $12.99, just like a bottle of Smirnoff. Head over to SmirnoffDrops.com to check out upcoming drops and check out these Smirnoff extraordinary items. Go quick. They will not last long. Please drink responsibly. Smirnoff number 21 vodka, distilled from grain, 40% alcohol by volume. The Smirnoff Company, New York, New York. Pricing at the sole discretion of the retailer. May vary by state. Please do not share with anyone under legal drinking age. Smirnoff, we do game days.
It's time to eat.
What are you hungry for?
Sit down and get ready to consume an abundance of fantasy football knowledge from Ross Tucker and John Daigle.
Feed me now. I'm starving.
On the Fantasy Feast Eatin' podcast.
Yeah, let's eat, baby. It is the Fantasy Feast Eatin' podcast. We are, of course, presented by DraftKings. DraftKings, the crown is yours. I'm Ross Tucker, former NFL offensive lineman, 5 teams, 7 years. You know this. And I love this show, especially this time of year. It is Super Bowl week. And last week, we went prop by prop, eagle by eagle. Not only how the Eagles could win the game, but the prop bets that John liked the most. And I chimed in with some that I liked as well. John, of course, being John Daigle. Check him out on social media at NotJDaigle from EstablishTheRun.com. You, of course, can go there, use the code FEAST to get a discount, and I highly encourage you to do so. You can check me out on social media at Ross Tucker NFL. We are at Ross Tucker Pod. One other thing that's awesome, you can always check out the show, youtube.com/Ross Tucker NFL. Doing great on YouTube as of late. Love those of you that watch the show or just watch the highlight clips. Again, youtube.com/Ross Tucker NFL. All right, so here's the deal, John. Last week, as you know, we went one by one down all of the different Eagles prop bets. We'll do the same this week for the Chiefs. It's been fun to really dive into it this deep. I don't know if I've ever really done this before. You know, we don't spend this much time on the Even Money podcast. Fezzik just kind of gives his 2 or 3 favorite props. So to actually discuss all of these is awesome. But before we get into the Chiefs props, let's just start with how they can win, how they need to play to win this game.
And I still like doing it this way just because you and I are football heads. Like, it is at the core, my career, what I do is fantasy, but I get to fantasy by loving football and understanding football in order to make the right projections and plays for fantasy. And so I love talking about the X's and O's of this stuff, especially with someone of your caliber and experience in the league. And that is also what got us to the same number, the same stat I used last week. I'm just going to copy and paste it over here as we continue to talk about the Chiefs offense, and that Patrick Mahomes now is an underdog or favorite of less than a field goal in the playoffs, 8-0 against the spread, since the Chiefs have now opened up as 1.5-point favorites over the Eagles in the Super Bowl. Now, we do have a little bit of history here between Patrick Mahomes and, of course, Eagles defensive coordinator Vic Fangio, because in 8 career starts against Fangio across the Broncos and Dolphins, Patrick Mahomes has completed 64.5% of his passes for 7.4 yards per attempt. What I find interesting, though, is that if you split the 4 most recent matchups against Fangio compared to in the past when it was 2 games against the Broncos, or 4 games against the Broncos, just before Fangio left Chicago to sign with Denver, then Patrick Mahomes has struggled in those last 4 games. Only 60.5% of his passes for 3 touchdowns, no picks in the 2 games against Miami, and in all 4 of those matchups, less than 6.5 yards per attempt. In that wild card game a couple years ago that we all recall when it was the frozen tundra, whenever the Chiefs opened up against Miami. Remember, the Dolphins were missing most of their top pass rushers. They were on to four-string players and free agents signed in December just because they had so many injuries in their front seven. And that includes also Jerome Baker and coverage linebackers that could have been out there to stop Travis Kelce. And that's why in that game, Vic Fangio said, screw it. Like, I don't have the bodies to play the style of cover 3, cover 6 that I would normally like to. So we're just going to try to blitz the hell out of Mahomes and get pressure on him and try to disrupt him that way. They played in that wild card game 60% man coverage, the Dolphins did, and that included nearly half of their snaps from cover 0, with no one over the top, and blitzed Mahomes on 55% of his dropbacks, which is completely unheard of. Because everyone knows, like, the 3 quarterbacks in the league you do not blitz are Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, Dak Prescott, to a T. I can tell you that. It rinses and repeats every single year when you look at the numbers. But I will say, when Fangio blitzed him in that wild card game, he did not throw a touchdown against the blitz, and they hurried him, the Dolphins, enough, even with those backup bodies, to force him to throw the ball away 4 times. And so it worked so well. I do wonder if we see that now that Fangio very clearly has the most talented chess pieces at his disposal, arguably for his entire career. The Eagles defense can play this a number of different ways, but just the fact that Fangio has stumped Mahomes the last 4 times they played and limit his explosiveness, it does gives me a little bit of hope, as I normally not would have whenever the Chiefs play any postseason game, let alone in the Super Bowl, just because, again, they have the best player walking this earth in professional football. Having said that, in the postseason, Patrick Mahomes has also been adding a little bit of caveat with his legs. We hinted at this in the last episode that we talked about the Eagles offense, but now Patrick Mahomes has back-to-back season highs in carries these last 2 games, including 11 and 2 rushing touchdowns against the Bills. And so that's what I find interesting, is that Fangio has shown he can slow him down. But that also entails the Chiefs stopping the Eagles' running game, and that's what they're going to have to do in order to hopefully match, if it does happen to become a low-scoring affair, against Philadelphia.
Ooh, that is very, very interesting. What about, you talked a lot about, the matchup between Mahomes and Fangio. You know what? We could just dive into it and do it that way, unless you got another point you want to make before we get into the props, John.
I got lots of props, and I can talk about all the receivers and their notes along with them. So please dive in with whatever direction you'd like. Yeah,
I'm trying to learn from last week. Don't want to have any redundancies. I do want to drink Labatt Blue Lights all week. They don't have a lot of it down here in New Orleans, but it's delicious. Drink some Labatt Blue Lights with your friends. Live life to the power of we. Always enjoy responsibly beer. Labatt USA, Buffalo, New York. Okay, so we can start, since you were just kind of talking about it, let's start with the rushing props before we get into the receiver stuff. So rushing attempts, you just talked about Mahomes. His number's at 6.5. I know we talked about this last week, but people that might only be watching or listening this week for the Chiefs, we got 6.5 attempts for Mahomes, 6.5 for Pacheco, 11.5 for Hunt. You kind of touched on Mahomes. Any thoughts on the Hunt or Pacheco props?
It's just really tough, and that's also an X factor here, is curious how the Chiefs are going to get explosive runs just to help move the chains beyond Patrick Mahomes adding that with his legs, since, again, he does not provide that during the regular season. He waits until the postseason, since you have to lay everything on the line, since these games matter significantly more now. It's win or go home. And so for someone like Pacheco, I will say the Chiefs have been moving away from him significantly. He has not increased his rushing yards total from the week prior in 6 consecutive games now, rushing for 20 yards or less, and with no more than 6 carries and 3 straight appearances, including these last 2 postseason games. So when I hear Pacheco carries, or more importantly for the prop, Pacheco under 22.5 rushing yards, that's the route I'm going to take. Yes, 22.5 does not seem like much, but given that the Eagles are still we always talk about their pass defense, and that's what overshadows them still being a very stout run defense and allowing just 4.1 yards per carry since they returned from bye, which is 24th in the league. They've been incredible still against the run. But for Pacheco, he has been inefficient, and I blame it entirely on the serious injury he's trying to come back from, and that's why they've had no choice but to lean more into Kareem Hunt. So I am betting under Pacheco's 22.5 receiving or rushing yards.
Got it. As we get to, you mentioned the yards, 22.5 for Pacheco, 29.5 Mahomes, 47.5 for Hunt. They actually have one up here for Worthy. 6.5. I like the over 6.5 rushing yards for Worthy. I think he's going to get a couple carries in this game and go over there. That's actually one that jumps out to me.
I love the Worthy over 6.5 rushing yards. I also like tacking it on because if you go over, I'm getting ahead of myself here, but if you go over a couple tabs there on DraftKings, they have rushing plus receiving props.
Yeah, I'm there.
Okay, and Xavier Worthy's over 68.5, and it's just the fact that he has very clearly emerged as elite rookies tend to do, but Xavier Worthy has shown us in the second half of the season he is an elite rookie. 5 catches now in 7 consecutive games, plus 10 rushing yards and 2 carries in 4 of his last 5. He's a player that they clearly try to get the ball in numerous ways, including last week when they trusted him with a downfield throw, and he went up and battled for the ball like he was A.J. Brown. He came down with that massively important contested catch. So yes, I do like Xavier Worthy, both over rushing and over 68.5 combined.
Ooh, that's a good one. It's so cool how many different props there are up.
They're everywhere.
For this game. It is it really would be fun someday to just actually look at every single one that they have, every possibility. All right, so we did the rushing attempts for the Chiefs and we did the rushing yards. Haven't talked as much about passing for Mahomes. His I'm looking for his attempts. It's interesting too how you can slide the odds, but the over-under on yards for Mahomes, 252.5, John, and the over-under on attempts is 36.5. So we're at 36.5 for 252.5.
I would be more comfortable with the over on attempts just because that's how the Chiefs have to win. Maybe we don't get there ultimately because on his dropbacks, he doesn't throw the ball. He instead scrambles away. But obviously, the Chiefs have to win through Mahomes. It has to engineer and be operated through Mahomes' arms. So prefer the attempts, the yards, just because, again, of this little bit of history we have against Fangio, the talent the Eagles bring in the secondary. I'm still a little skeptical of the ceiling he's going to reach here. I don't know just yet how I'm going to approach it in DFS. I wish I had a better way to help people out there. But I do think it could be a median passing game for him, even if the Chiefs pull it out.
Got it. Let's move in to some of the reception numbers. That's where there's usually, the most to get to. The receiving props, a lot of guys there. And the receptions over under. Travis Kelce's at 6.5 receptions. Xavier Worthy, who you just talked about, is at 5.5. Hollywood Brown, 3.5. Juju, 1.5. DeAndre Hopkins, 1.5. That must be like their default. Noah Gray, 1.5. Kareem Hunt, 1.5. Isaiah Pacheco, 1.5. 1.5 is like the baseline number that they'll put up, I guess.
And that also tells you how many guys the Chiefs still use in their offense. It is funny because they go out of their way to trade for DeAndre Hopkins, who wasn't used as a full-time player with the Titans at any point before he was dealt. But we also attributed that to the high ankle sprain he suffered during the preseason, thinking, okay, he just hasn't been healthy. He's going to get the bye, then arrive in Kansas City, and he'll get rested and slowly integrated by the postseason. But he has not been at all. He's still been the Chiefs' 4th receiver, and Hopkins now in these 2 games has run just 13 and 11 routes for a total of 1 catch for 11 yards. Under 1.5 does seem fine, honestly, but I am preferring to attack DeAndre Hopkins through his receiving yards, and that is under 16.5 receiving yards last I looked. Perhaps it's sunk a little bit. I looked last night. Maybe it's gone down a little bit since then. You can tell me. But I like going under Hopkins receiving yards instead.
The only thing better than game day predictions are the foods that come with them. Introducing Tums Fantasy Foodball Pool, brought to you by Tums, America's #1 antacid brand, and DraftKings. Turn football into foodball by building your best game day plate for a shot at winning a share of $40,000 in cash prizes. Join the Tums foodball action during this playoff season's most heartburn-inducing time. Visit DraftKings.com/Tums foodball now through February 9th to enter for free and select your game day plate before the start of each playoff round. Age and eligibility restrictions apply. Void where prohibited. See terms at DraftKings.com/Tums foodball. Don't let heartburn keep you on the sidelines. Try Tums Chewy Bites with a tasty outer shell and soft center for fast relief of heartburn, acid indigestion, and upset stomach. Check out Tums Gummy Bites, featuring a soft and easy-to-chew format for fast relief of occasional heartburn, acid indigestion, sour stomach, and upset stomach. Both available at Amazon, Target, and other major retailers nationwide. Be sure to follow Tums at Tums Official on Instagram and TikTok. All right, the Super Bowl is set. It is the Eagles and the Chiefs. I've been telling you guys about Smirnoff being an official sponsor of the Ross Tucker Football Podcast all year. So you already know that they're also an official vodka partner of the NFL and Super Bowl 59. What I love about Smirnoff is that you can get the world's #1 vodka without breaking the bank. Very important. This feeling is what the good folks over at Smirnoff call Smirnoff Extraordinary. And yes, I can say that way better than the guys in the TV commercial. They've got some awesome items right now dropping, including from Vernon Davis. You got to check it out. Head on over to SmirnoffDrops.com to check out upcoming drops and check out these Smirnoff Extraordinary items. Go quick. They won't last long. Please drink responsibly. Smirnoff #21 vodka, distilled from grain, 40% alcohol by volume. Smirnoff Company, New York. Pricing is sold discretion of the retailer. May vary by state. Please not share with anyone under legal drinking age. Okay, under the receiving yards on Hopkins. Any of these other ones? You kind of talked about Kelsey and Worthy. What about any Hollywood Brown thoughts?
So for Hollywood Brown and Kelsey, it's a little bit complicated because we did get a couple weeks ago in the divisional round, Hollywood Brown run that fly route. Patrick Mahomes delivered it perfectly, and Brown just happened to drop it. And whenever you're betting receiving yards under, players like that who can get open, they come to mind as players I'm terrified of betting under on. Last week, he was used more intermediate over the middle of the field and crossing routes. That would be much safer if they were using him in a similar fashion. But at the end of the day, he's still running the second most routes for the Kansas City Chiefs in the postseason. And so I think the numbers, as we talked about with some of the Eagles players, I think the Brown reception numbers are honestly fair. Although it's terrifying, Kelsey, I'd be more inclined to go under. And maybe there's a little bit of recency bias working against this since he is coming off of under 20 receiving yards against the Bills, even though the Chiefs won. But also, if you look at these last 4 games again against Fangio, he's only gone over 40 receiving yards one time. So in 1 out of 4 of those contests, Fangio has actually held him pretty well. And the one game he went over was that wildcard game I talked about, where all their coverage linebackers for the Dolphins were out. Like they could not cover Kelsey at all over the middle of the field. So I do wonder if that's going to be a priority for Fangio to make sure he eliminates Kelsey from the offense and then see if anyone else can get the job done instead.
So this is interesting because remember in the conference championship, Zach Ertz kind of ate up the Eagles.
Yeah.
I mean, Zach Ertz, I don't know if you remember, he's like 11 catches, 100-some yards. He got targeted at least 5 more times than that. But Ertz, the Commanders identified that Ertz against the second level of the defense was the best matchup for the Commanders in that game. I'm wondering if Andy Reid saw that and thinks, well, Kelsey can do everything that Ertz can do. I mean, they're both old guys. I think they're like the same age. And I wonder, 6.5 sounds pretty high. I almost want to go, John, tell me what you think about this. I want to go over on the receptions, over 6.5 on the receptions for Kelsey. but maybe go under the 63 and a half yards because he doesn't. I think it's going to be a lot of less than 10-yard catches. So he could either easily have 7 or 8 catches for 50 yards, 55 yards. Like, that wouldn't surprise me. They probably tell you not to do that, not to go over with one and under on the other.
So we do have something for that in the betting world. We call them negatively correlated parlays because obviously should not go along with each other. But you get significantly better odds whenever it is a player like that who can, like Zach Ertz, for instance, have double-digit receptions, but also barely go over 100 yards. And now Ertz led conference championship weekend in receiving. He was the only player to go over 100 yards receiving all weekend long. So shout out to Ertz. But Kelsey is that kind of player where if the Eagles are bound to stop him, like, yes, he can help move the chains, but we are hoping then he doesn't have yards after the catch or any explosive plays. And so we can negatively correlate those, parlay them, and hope he instead ends up with like a 7 for 54 kind of line.
I think that's like the most likely scenario.
Yeah.
Because I think, Bond does a pretty good job. Like, they're pretty good at tackling after the guy catches it, but not as good at preventing them from catching it in the first place. Kelsey's at 63.5. Xavier Worthy, 57.5. You said earlier we kind of like his rushing and receiving, which was over 60. Was it 65? I think. Hollywood Brown's at 41.5 on the receiving yards prop. Then you get to, Juju at 15.5. DeAndre Hopkins 13.5. Noah Gray, 12.5. And then you're getting to Kareem Hunt and P. Ryan. Isn't it crazy, by the way, John, just as an aside? P. Ryan's over-under receiving yards is 6.5. Pacheco over-under receiving yards 4.5. They had the 2 clinching catches last week in the AFC Championship game. Like, the 2 guys that maybe that was part of the genius in throwing it to them, but they're like 7th and 8th on the Chiefs in receiving yardage props, and yet that's who Andy Reid had Mahomes throw it to in the 2 biggest third down conversions of the game against the Bills.
Over the last month, the Chiefs have been integrating P. Ryan into their offense too for a sprinkling of plays like that one, where they bring him in on third down, give him a little flat route because he still is fast enough, and he did come out of college as more of a receiving back. That is his skill set, where he can get open if you leave him one-on-one against a linebacker. So 6.5 does make sense because he's going to get 2 or 3 chances. He just needs to get over the 6.5 on one of those chances.
All right, let's dive into the touchdowns now. We hit the passing, we hit the rushing, we hit the receiving. Touchdowns. The anytime touchdown scorer for the Chiefs, plus 130, Kareem Hunt, plus 130, Travis Kelce, plus 155, Xavier Worthy, plus 260, Marquise Brown, plus 265, Pacheco. I got to tell you, the first one that jumps out to me, John, is Mahomes at plus 300. I know they don't run quarterback sneaks, but they get down there and it's winning time. He finds a way to score rushing touchdowns. I don't want to steal your thunder here, but that was the first one that jumped out to me is Mahomes plus 300 anytime touchdown score.
I was actually waiting for you to reach that number. Yes, that is my favorite as well. We've already talked about Mahomes running more when the postseason comes around, including these last 2 weeks, or last 2 games, 7 carries, then 11 carries against the Bills. Yes, that is actually what you talked about, Mahomes not getting quarterback sneaks. Like, that's purposeful. The Kelseys have talked about that on their podcast before, because ever since Mahomes broke his kneecap against Denver, since that point, Andy Reid makes sure to always bake in other plays other than Mahomes doing the tush push or sneaks, because the Chiefs know if Mahomes loses or if he's gone, they lose. They're gone from the playoffs. The one player in all of football you cannot miss at all. So no more rushing at all for Mahomes. He has to do it from beyond the 5-yard line. As he showed us, he will still do in the playoffs against the Bills. So yes, I do like Mahomes to sneak in here. Plus 300 seems like a very fair number.
Yeah, that one jumped out to me. Are there any others that you would consider?
Not anytime touchdown props. There is one, though, off the board, because, again, We don't have 7 episodes to talk about all these tabs. But if you scroll over a little bit on DraftKings and the receiving props, and they have longest catch for every player. And I like Juju Smith-Schuster over his 9.5 receiving prop, because now we've seen 3 of his last 4 catches with Hollywood Brown available. Because, again, as I talked about, DeAndre Hopkins is not being used as their 3rd receiver. He's a rotational 4th guy just ahead of Justin Watson. It is instead Juju who has been being used from the slot whenever the Chiefs go to 3 wide receiver sets. And now 3 of his last 4 catches with Hollywood Brown since week 17 on the field as well have gone for 10-plus yards. And that includes last week when he had 2 20-plus yard catches. His role also, Juju's, in the postseason, these last 2 games for the wild card and divisional round, has increased. His route participation has actually gone up in each game as they're giving him more routes from the slot too. So I do like Juju being on the field. We know the slot is where you have at least a better chance to attack the Eagles as opposed to out wide. So I like Juju over the 9.5 longest catch prop.
Ooh, like it. Like it a lot. Nice work. I don't often ask you this, John, but the line is 1.5. It's been for a while. The total's 49.5. Either one of those jump out to you if you had to lean one way or the other? I know this is more even money territory. We do more props, but figured I'd at least just see if there's a side or a total you like.
I initially always lean, rocket scientist here, I'd lean with Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs. I will say, though, for everyone who listened to the first episode against the Eagles, whenever I was doing my research for the game, I initially came in thinking, and this is how research works, I have an idea, and then I look into it deeper, and I'm like, oh, I was actually wrong about that. I am worried that the Chiefs' run defense has fallen apart at the wrong time against the wrong style of offense and style of players, and Jalen Hurts and Saquon Barkley. So I do believe the Eagles can pull it out by a field goal, and unfortunately, that's going to be my pick. Having said that, I'm not like Fezzik, where I have money on this game. The past couple of years, I have had honestly some of my biggest bets of the season on the Super Bowl because I was very confident, including last year. But this year, I have nothing in terms of the line because I don't know. I think it's so fair down the middle. So I am picking the Eagles, but again, my money's not behind it, so take that for whatever you want.
Well, and on Friday's Ross Tucker Football Podcast, I will make my official prediction, as I always do. I think the Eagles are the better team. I'll give you a little sneak preview. Really hard to go against the Chiefs in a 1-score game. I mean, yeah. I feel like there should be a prop where it's like Eagles win by 2 scores. I'd like to see what that is because I think that's their best chance.
You can alt bet it.
Yeah, good point. Good point. I can alt bet it. It's a terrific point. Check him out on social media at NotJDaigle. As a reminder, the show is year-round. Next week, we'll get into some really fun stuff. We'll recap the Super Bowl, our props, what worked, what didn't. Before you know it, we'll be previewing the draft and free agency and those prospects. It's going to be awesome. So glad to have all of you guys along for the ride. I'm at Ross Tucker NFL. We are at Ross Tucker Pod. I'm stuffed. We're done.
Thanks for tuning in to Fantasy Feast. Make sure to also check out the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, Even Money, and College Draft, all on the DraftKings Network, YouTube, or subscribe to the podcasts on your favorite platform.